Hello, welcome to our B3 Games panel. My name is Diana Feuerbach. I'm very happy to be hosting today's discussion. Protection of minors versus unlimited access to computer games. China as a role model. This is the topic I'll be discussing today with my three very interesting guests. First of all, I would like to introduce Dixon Wu. Dixon is joining us from Hong Kong. Dixon, you're an entrepreneur, consultant, investor, and designer. You have founded RETRO.HK Gaming Expo a few years back. That's a yearly event dedicated to the history of video games. Welcome, Dixon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Up next, we have Thorsten Unger. He's joining us from the Düsseldorf area in Germany, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yes, you are so many things. You're an expert, author, and entrepreneur in the field of games and digital education. Most specifically, you're the founder and CEO of Wegesrand, a network of professionals specializing in game-based learning. And you also were at some point a spokesperson for the German Games Association, and maybe we'll mention that later on. Welcome, Thorsten. Last but not least, we have Marian Härtel. Marian, you're joining us from the Berlin area, correct?
Very, very close to Berlin, but yes.
Yes. From a Hong Kong perspective, it's Berlin. So,
Yes.
Marian, you're an IT lawyer and a business consultant specializing in online entertainment, web media, and computer games. You have clients from Europe, the US, and Asia, many of whom are active in the esports industry. Great having you, Marian.
Thank you for
So
having me.
let's go in medias res. Since September, young people in China, we're talking about minors who are less than 18 years of age, have only been allowed to play online games for 3 hours a week, mostly on the weekends. Friday night, 1 hour, Saturday night, Sunday night. This news made headlines in Europe, maybe more so than most people expected. It was on all the newscasts. It was really big in the print press as well. So maybe Dixon, since you're the one who is geographically closest to mainland China, in your opinion, what's behind this seemingly drastic measure?
Well, let me just briefly go through what this measure is, right? So it's basically limiting minors from playing online video games. Okay, so which means that mostly that would include, games like MMORPGs, online mobile games, for example. So that would not include offline gaming, as some I have read some articles from overseas that they have actually misinterpreted that a little bit, and so they basically ban minors from playing online games on school days, on weekdays. So they're only allowed to play on Fridays, Saturday, Sunday, and public holidays from only 8 to 9 p.m. Okay, so which means that 3 hour gaming time is not flexible in a way that you can choose when to use them. So it's basically 1 hour per day, right? And of course, there's a lot of other limitations, such as limiting how minors can purchase items, virtual items in games and such. So, but we're mainly talking about the time limitation here for minors to be playing games, and yeah, so this is basically what is happening.
So, what were the reactions in China and maybe also in Hong Kong?
Well, I think when the headlines came out, or when this came out, a lot of gamers would be worried, and of course they would have discussions about, is this, limiting how I would play games, or how I would experience future gaming, right? But I think we have to also understand that there is a huge addiction problem going on, right? So I think the China government, is really just trying to do its part in stopping, the online gaming addiction to be even more out of control, and which means that it has to see a certain level of being out of control already.
Thorsten and Marian, were you surprised when this new regulation come out, and what do you make of it?
Actually, I was a little bit surprised, because it sounds for us Europeans or other people from outside China, it looks very restrictive. I was very surprised that they even are telling these people only to play from 8 to 9, so they have to create their daily routine around that gaming time. Actually, that also would cause, I think, a lot of technical problems, because all people are playing at the same time.
Yes.
I was not that surprised that the Chinese government is getting more restrictive about massive multiplayer online games, because it is some kind of a problem. The question is that the right way to go against addiction regarding video games? And I have my doubts that this is the way how to do it. Actually, of course, but I was surprised because of this hard restrictions, only to play Friday, Saturday, Sunday at from 8 to 9. But I was not surprised that they will do something against addiction regarding video games.
Marian?
Yeah, I was a little less surprised. Maybe I agree a little bit with Thorsten about that strict exact 1 hour, which is not flexible at all. But if you seen what they have done prior to how to allow which games to allow to come from foreign people, how gaming in China is, in parts at least, very, very different to Europe. Because they have smaller apartments, so they play more in internet cafes and whatever, which are harder to control. So you have to control it on the level of the game provider, which you then have more enforceable laws to actually restrict them in the hours. And if you know how really addicting some of the players are, especially to the very, very famous free-to-play model in Asia. And that, if you combine that together with the recent efforts on social behavior and promote social behavior and being good people in China, I don't even want to judge this, but if you see that as a whole, I was not surprised that it was coming.
I'm going to read a brief statement from a state-run Xinhua news agency. The new online gaming rules are an effort to protect the physical and mental health of minors. And they even called online gaming spiritual opium. That's a very strong wording to our
Yes.
European ears.
Yes.
And we have to make clear that this is specifically targeting online games that have the characteristics of pretty much never ending and letting you meet friends virtually. So those are two components that are very appealing and maybe make them dangerous in the sense that it's really hard to stop playing when you're a kid and you hang out with all your friends there and you want to get ahead, yet there's no end in sight, there's no game over ever. These are two very important characteristics that set them apart from maybe games in the past or other offline and console games. Maybe you would like to discuss that a little bit, gentlemen. Thorsten.
Actually, the most important aspect is that they forbid that for people under the age of 18. I think that's very important, because we are talking about a youth protection topic here. They are protecting kids, grown up people, but still kids under 18. So this is strategy how to deal with that topic, I think also in Germany nobody would be happy if a 12-year guy old or 14-year guy old boy or girl is playing 6 to 10 hours a day on an MMO. Nobody would like that actually in Germany too. But the method how to stop that is different. From my point of view, such kind of games should never be in the hands of kids younger than 12 or something like that. This is a political discussion how to get people away from games which are that time consuming. And that's not a Chinese problem, that's a global problem, of course, because I have 2 kids, 9 and 13, and when I let them do what they want, they are playing video games for hours. But is that good for their development? I have no idea. I think not, especially not at the 9-year aged girl. So this is a question of use protection, and the Chinese way is a little bit complicated for us as a society, maybe because we don't like that kind of hard restrictions. So we don't want to have people saying you have to do that and that and that time. From my point of view, you need a use protection system which simply do not allow kids to play games like that in that time spending like in a media consumption like this. So it's a different approach. From my point of view, kids aged younger than 12 should not play these games at all. So that's about the 6 years from 12 to 18 where we have a discussion. But that's the case, I think. So they have a different method how to realize use protection. It's not about adults, actually.
What do you think are some of the specific dangers to minors, to young people whose brains are still developing, and sort of if they play so many hours?
This is
On
proven
the
science. This is proven science. If you talk to game designers, Marian knows a lot about that because he was also very deep in researching from the legal perspective on that topic. We know exactly that games are designed to be time consuming. That's what we do when we design free-to-play games. That's the case, actually. So of course there's a problem if you create games with a very high time consuming approach and you put it to young target groups. It is a problem, actually. So
okay, Marian, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah,
what would happen?
Especially the free-to-play model, which actually is a role model originally developed in Korea, but very, very fast adopted in China. Actually, the whole monetization of free-to-play that needs some kind of addiction, because you have a smaller amount of people that actually pay for the game. In order to motivate these people to pay, you need more people that exchange, I don't want to pay money, I want to invest time. And if you don't have this, the other people wouldn't pay. So the whole monetization aspect of that game relies on the fact that people play, that a larger amount of people play a lot, because you have to, for every dollar that you don't want to pay, you have to eventually play 2 hours. And whoever doesn't want to pay a dollar to play 2 hours has to play $1. So and it's a larger part of people who don't pay. In general games, free-to-play games, you have eventually up to only 10% of the people that
Well,
actually.
if you're 10 years old, maybe you don't have that much pocket money. If you're a kid,
you have two perspectives.
Yeah, and so that's very, very limited, and especially if you look at China, you have more these pay-to-win games. You have that in China that is very well developed, and it's often a lot of the Chinese games are even unlimited. I've known games in China that if you would have the money, you could invest $1 million. Something that's pretty much impossible in European game designs, and it's very crazy. I've seen a business guy who invested $5 million in an MMORPG and be the king in that game, and actually a king. He could control everything, and the game designer in China, they even didn't limit it, because the amount of people who actually pay, just due to the social demographic issue in China, it's even harder than it is in Europe. So yeah, there probably had to be something done.
Actually, there are three it goes in three directions. Actually, first of all, game design into a free-to-play model or in an MMOG is time-consuming. It is the game design. The product has the game design to be time-consuming. That's one aspect. It takes time. Combined with a free-to-play model, taking time for a game does also mean you have people are spending money while playing the game. If they play less, they spend less. So there's a combination of that. If I look onto the children's market, I think an adult, of course, there's also something with addiction in that, but an adult, of course, can do whatever he wants with his money, actually. But when it comes to kids, I think the financial aspect, is that a big topic, Dixon, about money spending of these kids? Is that a topic, or is it only time consumption?
Well, currently, I think they're focusing on the time consumption, but it is actually there is actually another regulation that came out limiting in-game purchases for minors, because it has been. I think the problem is that a lot of these minors don't actually have their own devices, right? They're using their parents', tablets or even their mobile phones, which means that when you're playing, it's automatically linked to the parent's account, right? And which means that when kids at a very young age, when they actually see an amount, right, when they see a number, a sum of money inside of the game, there's actually no concept for the kid to understand that what I'm getting here actually links to the outside world, right? And so that becomes a problem, because whenever they see something that they want, and for someone that has no concept of how much things are, they would just click on it, right? They would
They
just
would
tap
just
on
go
it.
for it.
Yeah, and they would just go for it because they might have lost a game, they might need to pay to continue, or they might need to buy a special item to win, the next round,
Actually,
or whatever reasons, right?
when we are discussing this, we have to mention also that young people in China are still able to play offline video games whenever they want. This is a business model related restriction. It's about massive. It's about online gaming. It's about MMOs. It's about RPGs. And this is also something we have to put into that discussion. If I look onto how this topic is discussed, a lot of people are saying the Chinese government is restricting video games for kids at all. And that's not the case, actually. Even maybe Dixon will talk against that, but I think that's the case, actually. They are against business models, game types which are time consuming and which lead people to spend more money than they may have, and which causes addiction. And this is all about what happens with the kids in China right now regarding games. And when I'm wrong, please correct me, but offline games, for example, are not topic of that restriction. So maybe we look more onto that business models, and if they are created in a way that they reflect the situation of growing up, of growing kids. That's maybe the essence of it. It's time consuming. They could spend money on that. It's for me, the whole topic is about use protection right now. Maybe they changed it, but from the perspective from now, it is about use protection of critical game mechanics for kids.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you. And I think their approach would be to, kind of hammer the nail that is sticking out. I think online games and MMORPGs are the ones that draws the most minors, and the most having addiction problems. And this model is also causing a lot of other problems, because I mean, in terms of the quality of the games, that has been discussed before too, and that's the reason why they try to limit certain games to go on shelves, because everyone is just trying to create a game where people can kind of play for free, and then you have to do in-game purchases, and that lowers the whole quality of all the games that are coming out, and a lot of them are becoming sort of like, in a sense, gambling, because you're actually buying coins and chips and tokens, or whatever they call it in the games, right? So and there is actually no way. I think they're pretty sure that there is actually no way you could actually ban video games in general, right? So one of the topics that I bring up in my lectures is that, for example, I'm a retro gamer, sort of, I play more, again, I play modern games, but then I mostly enjoy retro games, and the main reason is that you could actually stop, games in the back in the days didn't have this online capability of ever expanding your emergence in the game, right? So a game from the NES era or whatever, there's actually a time where you can actually stop. It just feels like, okay, it's a wrap, right? But then online games have no limit in terms of the design. It's designed, as the most of you have mentioned, it's designed to be ever expanding so that you could have more things that you want to pay for, right? And so I don't actually think that there is any way they could limit gaming in general. I mean, they've tried in the past, right? So for example, in the past, most video game consoles were actually banned in mainland China, right? But then the problem is, when there is a certain regulation up there, there's gonna be a certain strategy down there, on the citizen level of parallel importing certain consoles, right? Or even uh, piracy, as a sake of spreading culture, spreading video game as a culture that also contributes to playing certain games, even when there is a ban in certain governments.
Hmm. Well, let me take this maybe to a more general level about
Mhm,
how the youth, the Chinese youth, are pretty much like in government speech the most important asset because they're considered the future of the country. And due to the one-child policy and maybe other aspects, it has become child rearing has become a rather expensive endeavor in China
mhm,
because the education takes up so much time and resources, and this is something that always baffles us Europeans when we see reports on television and other media about just regular Chinese kids, the schedule that they have to manage. It's astounding, like we hear of them going to school like pretty much 7 days a week, and the parents
mhm,
paying for extra lessons, and then they have to play the piano as well, and then they have to learn English from age 3 and things like that.
mhm,
It's really amazing. And so I guess it becomes more clear how fragile and how precious these youth are considered. And then you have a danger that is really putting maybe the entire, I'm exaggerating, right? Like the entire country's future at risk. And then that's where the drugs, the opium comparison comes into play. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that, Dixon.
Yes. So I mean, this regulation is just one thing that we're looking at right now, right? But then if you look at a few things that have happened uh, in the past year or so, right? So they mentioned that, for example, they're actually limiting, even streamers, right? Because that's part of the whole, entertainment system that they're trying to reform, let's say, right? And I think the government is seeing a few problems. First of all, is that the one-child policy, to my understanding, is not anymore, because they understand that there is an aging population going on, and so the youth, again, is the future of any country, right? So for them, it would be especially important. And secondly, there is actually a problem with some of the youth are claiming that they will do their minimum, right? I don't know if you've heard of that. There is actually a movement, a trend, let's call it, of youth in China, uh, saying that they would just do the bare minimum, and that has a
Okay.
lot of that has raised a lot of concern in terms of the development of the country and all that, right? And so limiting their gaming time, I would say, is part of the strategy, or just one small aspect of the general strategy to actually hoping that the youth would actually stand up and go do things. And so I personally see a lot of other things that are related to this regulation rather than just trying to limit online gaming. And I agree with Thorsten. It is actually uniquely banning certain games, for example online games. And I think that's why it's doing that. The government is doing that because they think that this is one of the reasons why it's making our youth less active, or you could even say that they're actually doing minimal, because now they see how the youth can just enjoy life in an online game. And so this is a series of I think regulations that would be coming out in the future, of how the government would want our youth to be active and productive rather than just being in an online game.
So the bare minimum, I'm just going to do the bare minimum. Maybe that would roughly translate as to a no Bock in German.
No, it's about being happy and satisfied with having less. It's a movement which is not only in China. A lot of people realize that all this kind of consuming is creating their daily life is not making you any happier. So these people are trying to live with a minimum of effort in some way, because the more effort would generate more wealth, but the wealth is maybe not needed, so you do not have to invest that much. That is some kind of a philosophy. It's also, for example, getting rid of everything you don't need, actually. Yeah, a lot of people are minimizing their households, for example, that they only have a few things, and if you only have a few things, you have less work with that. So it's a philosophy, and this is not in China. It's a general thing of how you behave with your daily life, with your lifetime. And if are you aiming for things you do not need, actually? That's a question a lot of people are asking themselves. But Diana, from my point of view, there are a lot of parallels in the Chinese society to the Korean society. Everything you're telling about how kids grow up, it's exactly the same in Korea. In Korea, you have also this 6 days a week school. The 7th day they do something else. They come back from school at 3 in the afternoon, and then they have private lessons. They play an instrument. They have to do sports. And the day for an average Korean kid, the day is over at 8 or 9 in the evening. So they are done. They even do not have any time to play. And if you look onto, there are other figures which make us maybe concerned about that. Is, for example, in Korea, 90% of the kids are studied, but they do not have that much employment possibilities in Korea. So a lot of Korean kids are leaving Korea afterwards because they don't find a job. And if you don't realize, if you don't make it to get to study, you're more or less a shame for the family as well. So there's a lot of society pressure on that. And the suicide rates in Korea, for example, under kids is very high because they have all that pressure all day long. And from the perspective of how the market for employees is changing, you just have to look onto digitalization. You have to have some kind of a high standard in the future to get employed, because all the low rated jobs where you do not have too much abilities, they are replaced by machines and robots and stuff like that. So of course there is a concern. If you're not highly educated, you will not have a perspective in that society where low qualified jobs were done by machines. In Korea, you have to keep that in mind as well. There is a game shutdown from 8 in the evening, I think, or 9 or 10 maybe, to 6 in the morning. So you are also not able to play in Korea video games like MMOs in the night, actually. I'm not sure if this still exists, but that was the case 3 years ago when I was in Korea the last time. So kids were not able to play in Korea every day in the week from some time to 6 in the morning, these kind of games. So that's nothing new. The Chinese are not inventing that. They are just adopting it. So you have to keep that in mind. And it's a concern. And from my point of view, is it's a youth protection problem what we have here, and a business model which is 100% focused on time consuming consumption.
I would like to add to the digitalization issue that Thorsten mentioned. I think China and Korea are in many parts way ahead and more ahead in society and in topics than Europe, than a lot of European people actually want to admit. And one thing is the use of mobile phones and digitalization, and especially this from people in China that I know, this you have to do a lot that actually propelled using mobile phones, because you could do this on the way to the work, in the car, in the train, and whatever, and could play these games. And that even was a big risk. And it led to people missing appointments and stuff like this because you played games. But if you then come to the way how the Chinese government actually wants to control society or form it to a better society, it is the mobile phones are harder to actually control than eventually ban a PlayStation, which you then just buy. Everybody has a mobile phone, but if you actually restrict the people that provide online games, the companies that provide online games, so even if you have the app on your phone, you cannot log in or you cannot buy something, then actually the mobile phones are less interesting. So the mobile phone usage is so much bigger in China already, probably even more in Hong Kong. Dixon probably can elaborate on this, than it's in Europe. If you think people are in risk of I don't know, being hit by a car because they look on the mobile phone in China. Be in a hotel in China, there is like 99% of the people are walking here and chatting, and they're not typing on QQ or whatever, but they're using voice messages, and you often say, "Hey, please, hello, please don't bump in me," and you can control this much better if you control it on the source where the game is actually provided. If you have to control it on the parameter where actually the game is played, that's harder to control, because then you get that. I think that was a big problem like 10 years ago or whatever, when they started to restrict games. Then you have these cheesy black gaming areas somewhere in a shack that no officials ever could control, and people were playing there, and there could no police because that's somewhere in the slums, wherever, and that was, we had 10 of thousands of these games locations. But if you restrict it with the game provider,
I think Marian brought up a really good point, which is I think cell phones or smartphones, I think is one of the core challenges of this generation. I mean, globally, right? And from what, so for example, in Hong Kong, from what I read, right, I think there is an average of 2.5 phones per person in Hong Kong. And at first it doesn't make sense, because I personally have just one phone, and I can understand that some people have a business phone, right? The good old BlackBerry eras, right? But then, yeah, you have to understand that some people actually carry 2 or 3 phones just for games. I mean, there's this really famous elder guy that plays Pokemon on their bikes, right, with like 20 phones on their bicycle, and that's kind of what is happening. So everyone is carrying different phones for different reasons, and for example, in mainland China, I do have a lot of friends that carry 2 or 3 phones just for gaming, just for the convenience of having 2 accounts for a certain game. And so limiting online game, the playing of online games for minors, I think one of the main reasons is because it's so accessible right now, right? As you said, you have to go to an internet cafe or somewhere to play. I mean, let us remind us of our era of our high school eras, right? We used to go to arcades, we used to go to game centers, we used to go to internet cafes, right? But then now you basically just find any corner that you could sit, and then everyone has a phone, and then you have a sort of like a LAN party going on. And so I think that is the way that the government is thinking. And so this it's almost like a mobile internet cafe or mobile arcade everywhere. And so there's just no way we could limit it unless we go to the source, which is the companies that makes these games. And so we make them limit the players' playtime. And one thing that I think we haven't mentioned is that this regulation is accompanied by the fact that now everyone has to submit their government IDs for an account, right? Which means that it's not like you can open another account and then you could just play for another hour or something like that. It doesn't that doesn't work anymore, right? Of course, there's been a lot of other ways that they're trying to go through the loopholes, kind of. But then I think currently they're doing a very clean cut, I would say, just
Does
trying to limit.
does
Yeah,
it's a technical question. Does a 10-year-old in China have an ID, a personal ID that he or she could submit?
maybe the school ID.
Okay.
Maybe like I think they actually do now, because in the press release it says that all the accounts have to be associated with a real ID and a real name to identify who you are, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so you can't have multiple accounts. You can't have it's probably also linked to a certain phone number. So I mean it would only work this way, right? I mean, if you limit game time and then you could open endless accounts, then that's the same thing. And of course, that's, I think, in a way that's good, because then there's less fake accounts too, for the other players. Um, but yeah, so this is something that we should mention: real names and real IDs, real identification.
Now, there's probably one group in particular that might be rather unhappy about this new regulation. And those are youngsters who engage in esports, who
Hmm.
train for esport events and are part of clans and clubs. And how do you see how can they still be training, and maybe more in general tell us a little bit about the esports scene in Asian countries, because I understand it's very different from Europe in the sense that it's actually been accepted as a kind of proper sports,
Hmm.
and we haven't done that yet in Europe, for example.
Hmm. Which might be a good thing, actually. But I think everyone is trying to push esports into the mainstream, right? And especially, of course, the game developers and all that. And I think, as we mentioned, it's creating an excuse. It's creating an ultimate excuse for youngsters to be engaged in gaming, right? Because back in the days when you play games for a long time and you get yelled by your parents, then you basically just shut down. You have no excuse, because I am really entertaining myself, right? But then now they could say that I am in a ranking, I'm in a ranking match, or I'm training, or I'm pursuing my career as an esports athlete, right? Being someone, uh I actually majored in game design, and I had a really hard time explaining to my parents that you are actually paying for my tuition to go study in gaming in universities, and I'm actually just making the game, which is a bit easier to explain, right? Because people have to make these things. It was very hard for me 20 years ago, to explain to my parents that are very traditional parents. And then now you have this newer generation that has uh, you know that has the opportunity to actually become part of the esports industry, and then they could actually tell their parents that, yes, you're paying for my tuition to become an esports athlete. So I mean, that
And
can
why
cause a
not?
lot of problems. Well, the
But
the
why not?
problem is, if you're really good at it, you're really good at playing a certain game, you have to understand, or you have to tell the difference, that is it really that you're that good at that game, or is it the only thing that you're good at, right? I think there's always this balance. And I think I lecture in history and culture of competitive gaming, and so I sometimes I would see some students, they would claim that they're very good at this game, and I think they are good, but then you have to tell the difference of being very good at a game, or is that the only thing that you're good at, right? In life in general. I mean, if that's the only thing that you're good at, and you think that you're very good at playing games just because of that, is a wrong concept. in general. And so with the Asian Games coming next year in Hangzhou, right, in China also, I think this stirs up a lot of discussion where this is all headed. And I think one of the ways that we could, personally, we could try to adapt is basically a kind of like a certification of some sort, or almost like an authorized license if you're really part of a club or really part of a team. And that leads to the challenge of you actually have to give licenses to the club itself, whether they're just making a fake club and they're all just playing games in there, right? So I think in a way it needs to be limited in a way, because I think even people in Hong Kong, for us, we also have I don't think we get the full picture of how some things are needs to be controlled, especially how minors are playing games in terms of in terms of how addicted they are, and then also the mainstream report of all esports and all the good news about esports is really, I think, giving the government and also the parents a hard time to tell their kids to stop.
Marian, what do you think if like a 15-year-old is really, really passionate about esports and becoming better and better and hoping one day to become a champion? Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, nothing. I think Dixon has, in many aspects, it's completely right. But while esport is probably a panel for itself, as an esport lawyer, and I deal every day with professional esport teams and with the business development of professional esport teams, I can tell you that it's very important to define esport in the first hand. People who are not in that business often say esport is gaming, or esport is gaming a lot, and that's actually fundamentally wrong. Esport is actually competitive gaming, and playing a lot of games or playing games at all has nothing to do with games. That's the difference while playing Bundesliga and playing soccer in your school, and so you have to start defining this first. And China, even more Korea, it's way ahead in the professionalization of esports, of being it a business model, and they are in pretty much every games. They are leading the ranks and everything. And due to limited professionalization in Europe, actually, China is so much ahead in many, many games. But we are talking about professional games. We are talking about the business model behind professional gaming. We are talking about filling completely stadiums with people watching them like superstars. And what a lot of people are missing when they're talking esport, or eventually when they're talking bad about esports in the discussion in Europe, whether it's sports or not, is that, in my opinion, as an esport lawyer, esport is way more than only a trend. Esport is a social shift. It's directly connected to the digitalization. It's directly connected to that, at least in Europe, a 20-year-old person is not watching TV anymore. It's not reading newspaper anymore. If you want to market them, if you want to reach them, if you want to socially influence them, you reach these people through streamers and through esport talents. And this is something that I don't know it for real, but that I think that even the Chinese government will not miss, because they know what kind of power a real esports star and a real streamer can have. And it's a big business model. So yeah, esport has something to do. If you train, it has something to do with the risk of being addicted. But especially, as Dixon says, if you give a license to a team that has a professional approach, not every clan, hey, we are 5 people, we play together. If you have a business model team that has sponsors, that goes international, that could transport traditional or Chinese culture to the world, which is an approach that the Chinese government wants with the Silk Road approach, with digitalization and whatever, you need that esport trend. Because that's, as I said, it's way more as just people playing a lot. It's a way. Probably Thorsten sees it different.
No, not really, actually. Not really, actually. Being a semi-professional FIFA player, I know exactly that this has a lot of things in common with sports, actually. So, and if I see how much pressure I have with my son when we do a match together, we are playing a league and we are losing a match because we really don't work out doing exactly what is needed for that situation in the game. That's really sports from my perspective. That's really sports. The question is it sport? What kind of game are you playing? And does this media consumption is really good for the development of the kid? If you know that you have to play thousands of hours to be a professional esports player, this is something, this has a heavy conflict. And the question from my point of view is, if the Chinese government is after esports, after these restrictions, actually there's something also which is a little bit weird, because the change in China is, I think we didn't mention that before, you were able to play 1.5 hour every day, and now you can only play 1 hour at the weekend. That's Dixon, the change. There's not too much change on it. It was forbidden for kids to play for hours for at least 2019, I think. And in 2019 they also invented that you have to use your clear name, not a pseudonym, and you have to register that exactly is known how old are you, and everything like this is very restricted now. So the question about esports is, of course, it is some kind of a sport, but of course, if you want to, this is a conflict they cannot solve by this. If you want to be a very good esports player, you have to practice from 14 to something, and after 28, 29, 30 something, you're going down again. So exactly, when you compare it to soccer, if you're not able to train a lot in your youth time, you will never be world league we will not be on the top notch at esports. And that is a problem for China in the future. And I'm not sure if China will put these people onto such a high plateau and say, oh, these are the stars for the future, if they otherwise, on the other hand, are restricting the usage of games in a younger age in a very restricted way. That doesn't match together, you know? You cannot say, oh, these are the heroes of the future, they play games, but you should not play games. I think that's a conflict for the future. We will see that. From my point of view, there's a lot of things in esports which is really sports. I'm closer than you think, Marian, regarding my network to esports. In the meantime, I really like these tournaments and everything like that. It's very, very intensive and very, very nice to see how this develops. From my point of view, if you look onto mastery, if you're really good in something, you have to play for hours. If you're not allowed to, you cannot play for hours, and you will, of course, not be mastery. That will, of course, affect the esport industry in China if it comes to young players. That's it. And the question is, I think a lot of this discussion is about self-recognition and self-esteem. And this is a channel where why people are playing games, actually, because they get a positive reaction, they get something back from a system, from a community, and this is, of course, something now which we have to eye. What happens now in China if people are not able to play in their clans, if they're not able to play in their teams because they are 16 or something, and they're not allowed to play with them anymore with these teams. I am really eyeing on that, and from my point of view, we are only talking about a niche of people in a younger age. It's not in general about games in China. It's about these kind of games for young people, and let's see what happens.
Well, thank you so much. It was almost like a wrapping up already, Thorsten, because I'm afraid, gentlemen, we're running out of time. It's been a wonderful discussion, very lively, very interesting. Marian and Dixon, if you would like to, do you have any closing statements?
Maybe Marian first?
And really, we have to finish because we're time limited here. So
yes.
Okay. Yeah, very, very short. I think definitely it needs to be regulated, and we have similar talks in Europe. It means of how free-to-play model should be should be limited, and how kids should have access to something up to gacha type luck when you pay for it and whatever. You have these talks. And eventually, China is again ahead of economic and social developments in the digitalization field, and they're probably restricting it more and more heavily than we eventually would it in a democratic state. But in some sort, I agree with Thorsten that especially minors have to be restricted in some way, and that in the past game developers were, especially even in China, were saturating the risk of addiction, excessive payment for games, and the way of how learning, distribution, and work life is adjusted to how many games you play.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, thank you. So for my version of the wrap up, I think there's a few things. So first of all, I think every challenge or every regulation that is imposed brings new opportunities. You know, for example, if minors are limited in their game times in mainland China, then would that actually benefit Hong Kong, for example? Would it be a new opportunity for clubs or for organizations in Hong Kong to recruit some of these players that are minor? That might be something that would really happen. And another approach to limit minors gameplay, I kind of am a Nintendo guy, and I kind of like the Nintendo approach of things. If you look at how the Switch implemented parental control, they gave the right to the parents to actually limit that, right? So there is actually a setting on the Switch where you could turn on parental gaming, and then the parent can have an app on their smartphone and basically just control the time that their kids are playing. I think giving the responsibility back to the parents is also an important aspect. I think we can't just rely on the government or rely on anyone. I mean, those are your kids. If you want them to train in certain games, go ahead, right? And if not, then you have a certain control setting on the device, right? So I'm not saying that this is the ultimate solution. I'm just saying that this might be another way to do it, to give more responsibility back to the parents rather than just relying on things naturally happening.
Okay, well, thank you. And that was the kickoff for our next discussion, probably, that we'll be holding maybe a year from now. We'll see. Thank you so much,
Great.
Marian,
you.
Thorsten, and Dixon. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
watching, B3 audience. Check out all the other events and online offers of the festival, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.